This is Part 2, Episode 157. The terrifying spiritual waves persisted for a whole quarter of an hour before gradually pacifying. No. This can't be. How could such feelings exist between humans? Humans are supposed to be vulgar and shameless, disregarding anything in front of benefit. Why would you have such feelings, just why? Elux howled in hysteria. Right now he seemed like a wounded wolf, completely turning mad. No soul attack came. Long Houchen was drawing close to Kia, who noticed that right now Long Houchen was full of incomprehension. He had just consented to inherit Elux, so why would this holy necromancer make such a fuss? Elux kept yelling all along so far, but Long Houchen could feel that the aura of death in the 7th floor of the Tower of Eternity was disappearing at an astonishing speed. This place, originally full of dense light essence, gradually regained its sacred feel. This madness lasted for the time of a meal, before Elux gradually calmed down. Although he was just a soul with a body, it took him large gasps to breathe, and his body was at least half its previous volume. But it had become pure white. Right now his soul seemed ignited to burn strongly, and the soul fire pulsing in his eyes gradually pacified as well. Unexpected, what an unexpected thing. Elux's voice clearly became stiff, and although his emotions had settled down, his feeling of incomprehension was still present. Long Houchen looked at him without understanding. "Senior, you can let me inherit your power." Elux shook his head, replying in distress, "No, I am not qualified. I was mistaken. I didn't expect myself to really be so mistaken. I was mistaken for several thousand years." He shook his head vigorously, full of pain. Kia held Long Houchen's hand. Right now her mind was empty, filled up with Long Houchen's figure. She warmly stood by his side, all traces of her original coldness totally vanished. The haze from her youth's traumas were all swept clean, leaving no traces behind. If one were to ask her why, surely she would reply that it's the power of love. Right, Houchen showed her his abiding love, willing to renounce his convictions for the sake of love. This caused a sublimation of Kia's soul, as all negative feelings in her were swept clean at that very moment. Nothing else mattered in that life where this fulfilling love existed. Elux raised his head, his ardent look faced toward this pair of sweethearts. His warm expression contained an unspoken admiration, but no traces of jealousy. "Willing to hear my story? That's a story from 6,800 years ago." Elux's voice changed to contain a dense sadness, which came out all around him. For some reason, Long Houchen felt thin surges of sympathy when looking at him, and nodded unconsciously. Elux calmly declared, 6,890 years ago, I was born in a city from the Pombo Empire on the northwest of the continent. This city was called Sidi. My father was the Lord of Sidi, a hereditary earl, and I was his only son. From the day of my birth, I lived in nobility. For the sake of letting me succeed his position as earl in the future, he arranged the best teachers to teach me knowledge and etiquette. The year of my 6th birthday, my great affinity with light essence was found out. I was blessed with a constitution of a sign of light. Although nearly 7,000 years have passed since then, I still remember very well the great joy father had at the time. He held me in his arms, and shouted in excitement through the whole hall, "Elux, you are my pride." From that point, I became a light mage. My cultivation was extremely fast, shocking every teacher, and during the year of my 11th birthday, I had already become a mage of the 4th step. And at 13, the 5th step, then at merely 15 years old, I became the youngest mage of the 6th step to have ever appeared in the continent. At this point Long Houchen was also shocked, because, despite being a sign of light too, he had yet to reach the 6th step when he was 15 years old. In other words, Elux was even more outstanding than him at the same age of 15 years old. Father said that I was shockingly talented. Therefore, he personally brought me to participate in the talent war organized at that time between the 3 empires by the Glorious Church, where only youngsters below 20 were allowed to participate. Right, does the Glorious Church still exist at present? Have they yet taken over the whole continent? Long Houchen shook his head. No, at the time of the start of the Dark Age 6,000 years ago, the glorious church was annihilated by demonkind. Annihilated. Elux became blank, and immediately made the strange statement, "Great, great." I knew that they would one day walk this path. So, what was I saying again? Talents war. Kia reminded him. Right, the talents war. I was without doubt the focus of this whole talents war. The enemies that came out in front of me rarely resisted for over a minute. When I was young, I was also on par with your looks. Uncountable young ladies from the three empires gave me coquettish looks, and during the finals, my opponent was the Princess Fuluor of the Empire. She was also a genius, a powerful summoner. With the royal family's backing, she already had a purple thunderstar dragon emperor as her contracted beast. Although her cultivation was below mine, her endless successions of summons were tough to face. That battle had lasted for a whole half of an hour, and in the end, because of her insufficient spiritual energy, she lost by my hand. I thereby became the final champion, and our Pombo Empire became the great winner. No matter how many years had passed since then, Elux looked extremely proud as he recounted these facts, making clear how impressive that feat used to be. At that time, humankind was still ruling over the whole Shingmordalu, and the total human population was perhaps 10 times more than nowadays. This talent war was undoubtedly a stage for the youngest elites, so the achievement of that victory was truly a great glory. The Pope of the Glorious Church from that time rewarded me personally with a direct title of Viscount, and a feudal fiefdom of 50 kilometers. My reward was a great item, later known as equipment of epic tier. The me of that time was quite pleased with himself, having become the most glorious youngster of all continent. Even the Pope's son Palo was nothing in front of me. Also, that saying a friendship may arise from an exchange of blows is true. That battle with Princess Fulo created a link between the two of us. From that day onwards, we were known as the two great seeds of the empire, on whom great hopes were placed. I was then transferred to the Royal Academy, pursuing my studies alongside Princess Fulo, and received all the support of the empire. Just by listening to his story, Long Houchen and Kia could feel how successful Elux was in his younger times. Receiving such glory at the age of 16 was not something just anyone could do. Elux's face started to fill with warmth. During the period of my studies in the Royal Academy, I was with Fulo training together and researching magic together all the time. Our feelings started to get deep between the two of us, and I deeply loved that beautiful genius. When the two of us were together, we were never short of topics to talk about. We made an oath of eternal love, engrossed with each other. The rise of these feelings did not only not adversely affect our cultivation, but instead made it faster and faster. In the year I turned 18 years old, I became a grand magic tutor of the 8th step. Given my cultivation speed of that time, I was certain that I would surely be able to break through the 9th step at the age of 20, making me the youngest powerhouse of the 9th step in the whole continent. As time passed, the superiority of my talent became clearer and clearer. Although Fulo was also outstanding, in the end she was unable to compare with my gifts as sign of light. When I broke through the 8th step, she had just broken through the 7th. Back at that time, I could see that she was unhappy, but didn't put a lot of thought into the issue. I told her that I was willing to make a pause to wait for her to catch up with my cultivation. At the same time, I asked His Majesty her father for her hand, and he accepted a marriage between Fulo and me. Everything went smoothly. His Majesty was extremely pleased about our relationship, and the day I would break through the 9th step would be when we would marry. At that time, I was already acclaimed as the man most likely to rise to the level of God. The Pope of that time personally came to the empire, expressing the wish to take me as disciple, and to take over his position in the future. For the sake of the empire, and for Fulo's sake, I refused. At that time, the church was extremely powerful in the continent, and in some manner, all three kingdoms had to listen to their orders. I could feel His Majesty's unwillingness, and for His Majesty's sake, I preferred to offend the church rather than leaving the empire. After reaching the 8th step, my great speed of cultivation visibly slowed down. My teachers in the Royal Academy told me that because I only kept cultivating all the time, I was lacking in other experiences, and suggested that I go to the outside world and gain experience, to discover all the miraculous places in the continent so that I would be able to progress while gaining an understanding. I followed their suggestion and told Fulo about this matter, hoping to gain these experiences alongside her. But Fulo refused. Although she loved me deeply, she had an even greater eagerness to be number one. I knew that she was always looking to surpass me, but the gap between us only kept getting wider. So she chose to remain in the academy to keep training hard, looking to catch up to my cultivation. For the sake of reaching the 9th step as early as possible to take Fulo as my wife, as well as to bring an even greater honor and glory to the empire, I took this training trip. But never did I expect that because of the great gains in this trip, the incoming period of my life would become a total nightmare. At this point, Elux's face became gradually more and more sinister, filled with anger. Alongside his fury, his intense soul fluctuations caused repeated shakes of the Tower of Eternity. After leaving the Empire, I roamed through the whole continent. With my cultivation reaching the 8th step, I encountered almost no challenges. During 2 whole years, I wandered through almost all cities of the 3 great empires, discovering all the local conditions and customs and experiencing the joys and the sorrows of the world. The scope of my world and my cultivation all made considerable progress. And, maybe because I was the one chosen by the Goddess of Light, I had a lot of happy encounters in these 2 years, and acquired a martial technique of incredible might. When I returned to the Empire, my cultivation had already reached the peak of the 8th step. Upon seeing Fulo again, I couldn't help but take her in my arms while sobbing from extreme joy. I could feel that I was nearing the edge of the 9th step, only at 1 step from breaking through, and believed that I would be able to marry my most beloved Fulo in the near future, as well as to inevitably become the future greatest powerhouse of the Empire. At that time, I had almost no notion of schemes, and told Fulo about all my various adventures during these 2 years of training, to share the feelings I had during these moving encounters with her. However, something slightly displeasing happened to me later. The son of the Supreme Pontiff unexpectedly joined the Imperial Magic Academy to study. At that time, I found it very strange why he would come there. Compared to our Pombo Empire, the glorious church should have reached even deeper levels of magic researches, so he had no need at all to come here to pursue his studies. However, I didn't give it much thought, because of my joy from being on the verge of marrying Fulo. After I told Fulo everything about my trip, she held a great interest toward that martial technique I gained in my encounters, hoping that I could hand it over for her to learn, but I rejected her. That martial technique was certainly miraculous, but it could by no means be learned or used, because it came at a too great cost, and I feared she would get wounded in the process. Do you know what kind of martial technique that was? Even now, I still find it to be really miraculous. Although it was just a move, it required a perfect harmonization with the owner's soul to be executed. It seemed to come from an ancient tribe from another world. A type of martial soul technique. This technique had a very strange name. It was called tortoiseshell technique. When I had just obtained it, I still took it to be just a defensive martial art, but after deep researches, I found out that it had almost no relations with defense, but was an ability of prediction. Back then, the Glorious Church was the only other entity in the whole continent to have a prophet. I also have some understanding of it. All they can predict is the future. As for that martial technique, its use would execute a kind of divination, with a really overbearing aspect, its unconditionality. Launching the tortoiseshell technique would act on all living creatures in its scope, the user being no exception. And even if a god is in the area of effect, he will have no immunity either, being just as affected by its absolute control. It's such a fearful technique. But at the same time, as it has absolute effects, it brings certain danger. This technique has a great indeterminacy. After using it, the user will have no control over its effects. In other words, the effects may be positive just as they may be negative. But no matter what, the user will have to bear some burden, so using it could very possibly offer the user as a sacrifice for the tortoiseshell technique after a few uses, if they are unlucky. How could I be willing to learn such a martial technique? Or even give it to Fulo? At this point, Elux had an extremely bitter look, but Fulo didn't understand my painstaking effort. She thought I wanted to keep it for myself, and thus refused to transmit it to another. Its absolute effects and efficiency against even a god was just too alluring, making her completely unable to treat it lightly. Why didn't she consider that if I really wanted to keep it for myself, then I'd simply not tell her about it? At first, I was thinking that she was just temporarily letting her emotions affect her decisions and didn't think about it too much. It would likely calm down after 2 days. As expected, when I went to look for her 2 days later, she seemed to have entirely recovered, only looking as though she still had some worries. But her attitude to me was the same as before, and the matter of that day was not mentioned again. Never did I expect her to be such a snake-hearted girl, who had already executed her schemes against me. Elux gritted his teeth as his whole body shook, clearly because the experience he had at that time was simply far too painful. Then on a bright day with good weather, with the blue sky stretching continuously over the horizon, and the sunshine was especially abundant. The intense light essence brought an indescribable sense of harmony to me as the sign of light. This sunshine was really ideal. Fulo had invited me to go for an outing, to which I naturally agreed gladly, and even told her that I would seclude myself to aim for the 9th step after that excursion, to ask His Majesty for her hand after I succeed in accomplishing this breakthrough. At that time, I believed His Majesty would at least offer me the level of nobility of a viscount, as well as a title of court mage. We exited the Empire, to head for the outskirts, and right when we were out for a scenic tour, I suddenly discovered that we were surrounded, a large amount of black-clad men sealing off every one of our routes of escape. These people were masked head to toe, making not even the slightest shred of their skins visible. Upon appearance, they launched a frantic attack at us. At that time, Fulo was in a daze, seemingly having even forgotten about the use of magic despite her cultivation reaching the 8th step. As a man, protecting my own woman seemed like common sense in my eyes, especially with how conceited I was at that time. Relying on my cultivation reaching the peak of the 8th step, I made use of the various magics I had researched painstakingly. Those black-clad men were extremely strong, but a lot of them were killed at my hands. However, they were only growing more and more numerous, each of them reaching at least the 7th step. I found it very strange at that time. If this many powerhouses from the other 2 great empires were really infiltrated, how could the powerhouses from our empire disregard them to such an extent? If this kept up, I was afraid Fulo and I wouldn't ever get away, so I made the prompt decision of bringing out Fulo to immediately break out from the siege. At this time, Fulo seemed to have recovered her senses, immediately using various summoning spells to assist me, and we rode her summoned beast to flee back to the Empire. As we thought the enemies would already no longer catch up to us, we rushed out at full speed, and the distant walls of the Empire even came into sight. But suddenly, a slight chill permeated in my heart, and when I lowered my head, I found a pitch-black dagger piercing deeply through my chest, its handle being held in Fulo's hand. At this point, Long Houchen and Kia couldn't help but cry out in alarm. Never did they expect this Princess Fulo to actually betray Elux. They were lovers who had sworn the pledge of eternal love. At that instant, her look was completely filled with malevolence. Deep tears of sadness flowed out from Elux's eyes. She even murmured, "Why? Just why didn't you hand the tortoiseshell over to me? Why? I hadn't planned to go so far at first." My heart was in pain, even more in pain than my wound. My cold chest gradually got numbed, and I could feel my vital force gush out through that dagger. Even at that time, I was still unable to believe that my beloved Fulo was the culprit of that act against me. I just loved her that much. For the sake of marrying her, I trained night and day. All for the sake of sharing happiness alongside her in the future. But she stabbed a dagger full of poison in my left chest, aimed at the spot which should correspond with an ordinary person's heart. This stab inflicted complete despair in me. She should have been clearly aware that I had no suspicions at all toward her, and moreover, her stab was timed the instant my vigilance was the most loose. This instant, even more black-clad men came from in front of us. They seemed to have been lying in wait since long ago, and expected all of this to happen long since. The previous ambush was just a start, but Fulo's stab was the true critical point in the move against me. A familiar-sounding cold voice spread. That man told Fulo, "Kill him." That instant, I finally came to a realization. The desire for survival caused me to push Fulo away, jumping off from her mount. That instant, Fulo seemed quite in a daze, seemingly having had a change of heart due to this stab, which stopped her from immediately finishing me off. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I took out a scroll, which was forged by a great master for me, and used that escape scroll, teleporting me instantly 6 kilometers away. They clearly didn't expect me to have such a thing in store, which is how I managed to get away. The instant the escape scroll took effect, I still remember clearly that the sobered Fulo hastily commanded her summoned beast to attack me. That instant, her eyes were only filled with cold killing intent, without any of the former tender sentiments. Long Houchen and Kia were already completely immersed in Elux's story, to the extent of forgetting the whole situation they were in. Perceiving the deep sadness coming out from Elux, they were totally able to imagine the kind of feelings he had back at that time. For a moment, the two of them were completely speechless. So there was after all a basis for the Sign of Light's betrayals to his duties. He was in the end betrayed, but how could that mere fact cause him to become the slumbering calamity? The sadness in Elux's eyes gradually turned into coldness. You are feeling that the mere betrayal of Fulo shouldn't be enough for me to betray my holy convictions. You misunderstand. This alone would still be insufficient to cause these changes in me. But Long Houchen, as a sign of light, you should understand that the sign of light is the one chosen by the goddess of light, and the resolve he has as such. However, the one to betray me was not Princess Fulo alone, but this whole world. Through the escape scroll, I broke away from their ambush, and only felt a great chilliness fill me at that time. The beautiful parts of my heart disappeared with Fulo's betrayal, but even so, I couldn't bring myself to hate her at that time. I loved her deeply, and wanted to think of her good parts no matter what. That black-clad man's final appearance caused me to guess that maybe Fulo was coerced into doing that, and was completely unwilling. Although I was clearly aware that, as the princess, it was almost impossible that there could be anyone who could coerce her, I still wanted to keep this way of thinking. At that time, I was just really too foolish. Fulo's stab was aimed right at my left chest, but she didn't know that unlike an ordinary person, my heart was located on the right side. Although her poisonous dagger caused heavy wounds in me, these wounds were not mortal. I resisted the pain with great difficulty, finding a hollow tree to treat my wound. Relying on medicine I had gotten in my adventures, I forced out the poison from my body before gradually eliminating all this poison by the means of my pure light essence. This process was painful and long, but I knew very clearly that even if I wanted Fulo to clarify all this, I had to first wait for my body to recover entirely for that. I heard a lot of brouhaha outside the hollow tree in the process, as if large armies were transferred around. But at that time, I did not expect the reasons for these armies to be deployed. It took 2 entire months for my injuries to get better, and my cultivation to recover. I stealthily exited the hollow tree to return back to the Empire. But before arriving at the city gates, a thunderous scene came to my sight. A very clear announcement from the royal family was displayed right nearby the city gate, in which was written, "The Duke of the Empire, Elux, who attacked the Princess Fulo to steal a powerful martial technique, snatching it and causing her to sustain heavy injuries, is wanted for the crime of treason. Their whole family is to be deprived of their territory and get death penalties. Every commoner reporting traces of the criminal will get rewarded with 10,000 gold coins." I absolutely didn't expect them to use such despicable means, actually making such bogus accusations. Furthermore, this announcement from the royal family was not the only thing. There was also an announcement from the glorious church with the same contents, designating me as a heretic corrupted by darkness. At that time, I took a whole half hour to gradually come back to my senses. I loved Fulo deeply, but I wasn't a total idiot. If I hadn't realized this huge plot aimed against me at that time, I wouldn't be fit to be the inheritor of the identity of Sign of Light. I immediately went into concealment to disguise myself, thinking at that time that I had to find a proof that they were deceiving His Majesty and the Church, to prove my innocence. The key element to this proof lay in Fulo, which is why I went to look for her to make it clear. Perhaps it was because several years had passed, or perhaps, because I was thought to have died from the poison, the Empire did not put emergency measures in place. So after I disguised myself, returning to the empire's capital was very easy. Looking at these formerly familiar places, my heart was in great pain. At night, I stealthily infiltrated into the royal palace, still extremely familiar with that place. Although I was a mage, having a cultivation reaching the 8th step, I had numerous means for infiltrating my destination. Coming into Fulo's quarters, I saw another man there. The son of the Supreme Pontiff, Palo. They were discussing, and that was in Fulo's bedroom. At that time, I already had guesses about the relationship between them, but was still unwilling to believe it. But when I clearly heard the contents of their discussion, I finally realized how stupid I was, and the extent of that plot. Back then, Fulo questioned Palo on why they hadn't found me, and he replied that he had already mobilized the Glorious Church's force, matching with the Empire's forces to find traces of me, dead or alive. That martial technique in my hands had to be seized at any cost. I gradually constructed it all from the clues I heard in the midst of their conversation. It turned out that as early as when I was out for a few years, Palo had already made a trip to the Imperial Academy, having two purposes in mind. One was to discuss the matter of pulling me into the Glorious Church with the Emperor, and the second, to chase after Fulo. At first, His Majesty had no interest in enticing me to join the Glorious Church. But Palo insisted, using countless means to seduce Fulo. Though, Fulo being so materialistic, due to his flowery speed and the appeal of the numerous martial techniques, and pills at the disposal of the Glorious Church, she finally gave in to his continuous offenses. Pero mentioned to her that the sign of light would be a threat to the Glorious Church, hence the Church needed absolutely to get rid of me, to make sure of their eternal rule. At the time, he would become the Pope and Fulo would be his Empress. Originally, Fulo still had some apprehensions, but Palo expressed to His Highness the will of the Glorious Church to support their empire in vanquishing the other empires, and in uniting the continent. Moreover, he promised Fulo to give her all the martial techniques from me for her to learn. Both the royal family and Fulo were finally ensnared by the benefits that way, while I became the sacrifice for all these benefits to be obtained. This was supposed to be a perfect plan. By taking advantage of the trip I took with Fulo to ambush me, they wanted to deplete my strength, and then on the way back, Fulo would take advantage of my lowered guard and exhaustion to move against me, making it hardly possible for me to escape. At that time, they would only need to kill me and report me as a betrayer to the Empire and the Church, so that even despite my reputation as the pride of the Empire, the truth behind this conspiracy would rapidly be drowned. I hated them bitterly. I never expected my homeland, my lover, and my convictions to actually betray me together. At that time, my brain went blank, and as Fulo and Pero were in the midst of making out, I suddenly rushed in and launched fatal attacks against them. My appearance was just too sudden for them. Although they were top figures of the younger generation, there was a significant gap in our strengths, and this was moreover a situation of ambush. I very rapidly took the advantage, wounding Palo seriously while suppressing Fulo with my attacks. Although a large amount of powerhouses from the palace immediately gathered as a result, they did not dare act rashly, as I held Fulo and Palo as hostages at that time. Then I questioned Fulo, "Why did you have to do this to me? What in me dissatisfied you?" She only kept begging me for her survival then, but I had already heard all their previous conversation. How could I still trust in her words after that? At that time, my only thought was take to them down with myself. The former me was incredibly proud. At that time, I had been reduced to the position of traitor to the nation, completely unable to accept such a huge downfall. Having no more attachment to my own life, I only wanted to take down this cheating couple with me. But that Palo was, after all, the son of the Pope, having many survival means at his disposal. Right when I was prepared to take them down with myself, he used extraordinary means to summon the Pope's attack, causing me to get seriously wounded. And in the end, as I couldn't bear to move against Fulo, I could only choose to escape the encirclement. After I finally made it out, I went into hiding in the capital, covered in bruises after a narrow escape. Immediately, the Empire initiated a manhunt in the whole city, looking for traces of me. It was through the help of a beggar that I formerly saved that I luckily escaped their chase. But as I was just done healing my wounds came thunderous news. They had caught my family. Elux gritted his teeth and declared, They knew that I was concealed in the empire, which is why they released an announcement about executing the traitor's family. I still remember that day clearly. The sky seemed to get blood-red colored as His Highness passed down the execution order in front of the masses. When I saw Palo and Fulo clad in armor and cutting off my relatives' heads, I lost the last ounces of hope and light in me, which all faded away. Can you imagine? Someone who witnessed all his kin getting killed. My father, mother, older sister, younger sister, and the rest of my family, even the young children were not spared. My whole family was executed with no exception. I knew that they were waiting for me to show up at that time. Waiting for me with a perfect bait. They just understood my character far too well. But at that time, a black tile I had formerly gained in the previous training trip got affected by my dark emotions, turning my whole body cold and unable to move a single step. It was because of this that I had to stare blankly at the scene of my family getting slaughtered one by one. At that time, I was furious, having entered a frantic state. My kin's blood dyed the ground of the public square of the empire's capital. Not a single one of my 367 family members escaped this fate. They all met with violent deaths under their butcher's knives. At the time I recovered from that cold state, the rest of my family was already extinguished. I seemed to catch sight of their specters, pacing back and forth irresolutely in the sky, utterly irreconciled. I didn't step in as my family was already all dead, and I left that place with an overwhelming answer. As I did not appear from beginning to end in this slaughter, they believed that I already had left the Pombo Empire, hence the hunt came to a provisional end. Instead, they went on to search for my traces over the whole continent. This video will end here.